I still remember the smell of crayons and the sound of paper crinkling under my small hands. At 7 years old, I was convinced I was the next Picasso. Every afternoon after school, I'd rush to my makeshift art station in the corner of our living room, a plastic table covered in scratches and stains from countless creative sessions. My box of 64 Crayola crayons sat like a treasure chest, each color holding infinite possibilities. My drawings were everything to me. I'd spend hours creating elaborate scenes, purple dinosaurs dancing with rainbow butterflies, stick figure families living in houses that defied all laws of physics, and abstract swirls that I claimed were the wind having feelings. To me, each piece was a masterpiece worthy of the Louvre. I'd hold up my latest creation with paint-stained fingers, beaming with pride as I called out, "Mom, look what I made!" But my mother's responses were always the same. A quick glance, a forced smile, and words that would echo in my mind for decades. "That's nice, honey, but maybe you should focus on something you're actually good at." She'd suggest piano lessons, or math tutoring, or literally anything that didn't involve what she called my messy hobby. I didn't understand then that her dismissal was slowly chipping away at something precious inside me. All I knew was that creating art made me feel alive, made me feel like I had something important to say to the world. Even when my trees looked like green lollipops and my dogs resembled four-legged potatoes, I felt proud of what I could bring to life on paper. The rejection from my mother stung, but it didn't stop me. If anything, it made me work harder. I'd wake up early to draw before school, sketch during lunch breaks, and fall asleep with pencils in my hands. My bedroom walls became an unofficial gallery, covered with tape and pushpins holding up my daily creations. I lived in a world of color and imagination, blissfully unaware of the storm that was brewing. Looking back now, I can see that my mother was fighting her own battles. She was a perfectionist who had built her identity around achievement and conventional success. To her, my drawings weren't just not good enough. They represented everything she feared about pursuing dreams that didn't guarantee security. But as a child, I couldn't see past her words to understand her wounds. All I felt was the growing distance between us, measured in dismissed drawings and discouraged dreams. It was a Tuesday morning in October when my world shifted forever. I was getting ready for school, humming while I packed my backpack, when I noticed something was different about my room. The walls looked strangely bare, like a gallery after closing time. My heart started racing as I realized what was missing. Every single one of my drawings was gone. I ran to the living room, hoping to find my mother arranging them somewhere else, maybe finally ready to display them properly. Instead, I found her by the back door, tying up a large garbage bag with mechanical precision. The sight of familiar colors peeking through the black plastic made my stomach drop. "Mom, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. She turned around with that expression I'd grown to dread, the one that said she was about to deliver news I didn't want to hear. "I cleaned out your room, sweetie. Those drawings were just taking up space, and honestly, they weren't very good. I thought it was time to help you focus on activities that might actually lead somewhere." I stood there, frozen, watching her carry the bag toward the garbage bins. Inside that bag were months of my imagination, hundreds of hours of joy, and pieces of my soul that I'd poured onto paper. My first attempt at drawing our family dog. The birthday card I'd made for my grandmother. The comic strip I'd been working on for weeks about a superhero who saved the world with kindness. "But Mom, those were mine," I whispered, tears burning my eyes. "They were cluttering up your room, and frankly, they weren't going to win any art contests," she replied, not even pausing in her task. "I signed you up for accelerated math classes instead. That's something that will actually help your future." I watched helplessly as she lifted the lid of the garbage bin. The sound of my artwork hitting the bottom felt like a physical blow. In that moment, something inside me broke that would take years to repair. It wasn't just the loss of my drawings. It was the realization that the person who was supposed to love and support me unconditionally had just declared my dreams worthless. The rest of that day passed in a blur. I sat through classes without hearing a word, picked at my lunch without tasting it, and walked home with my head down, avoiding the sympathetic looks from neighbors who had witnessed the morning's events. When I got to my room, the empty walls seemed to mock me. The pushpin holes remained like tiny wounds, evidence of what had been lost. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to process what had happened. I felt hollow, like someone had reached inside me and removed something essential. The creative fire that had burned so brightly in my chest seemed to have been extinguished along with my drawings. For the first time in my life, I began to question whether my mother was right. Maybe I really wasn't any good at art. Maybe I had been fooling myself all along. The weeks following the Great Purge, as I came to think of it, passed in a grey haze. I stopped asking for art supplies for my birthday. I stopped doodling in the margins of my notebooks. I even avoided the art aisle at the store, afraid that seeing those familiar boxes of crayons would bring back the pain of that October morning. My mother, seemingly satisfied with her intervention, doubled down on what she called practical pursuits. She enrolled me in advanced mathematics, debate club, and computer programming classes. "These are skills that will serve you well," she'd say, nodding approvingly when I brought home certificates and awards from academic competitions. But success in these areas felt hollow. I could solve complex equations and write basic code, but I felt like I was performing someone else's life. The praise from teachers and the proud smiles from my mother only highlighted the growing emptiness inside me. I had become good at things I didn't love, while the thing I loved had been declared not good enough. During this period, I developed what I now recognize as a form of creative amnesia. I convinced myself that my artistic dreams had been childish fantasies, that my mother had saved me from pursuing something unrealistic. I threw myself into being the perfect student, the practical daughter, the child who made sensible choices. But art has a way of finding you, even when you're trying to run from it. I found myself lingering in museum gift shops, my fingers unconsciously tracing the edges of postcards featuring famous paintings. I'd catch myself staring at street art during family trips, analyzing the techniques and color choices before quickly looking away. In quiet moments, my hands would move automatically, sketching invisible drawings in the air. The most painful part was watching other kids my age pursue their artistic interests. In high school, I'd walk past the art room and see students covered in paint, laughing as they worked on their projects. I felt like I was watching a life I could have had, a version of myself that had been discarded along with those childhood drawings. My relationship with my mother during this time was complex. On the surface, we got along well. She was proud of my academic achievements and often bragged to friends about my practical accomplishments. But underneath, I carried a resentment that I couldn't articulate. I felt like she had stolen something from me, but I couldn't name what it was because I had convinced myself it wasn't worth having in the first place. The silence around art in our house became deafening. It was as if that part of me had never existed, as if those years of creative joy had been erased from our family history. I learned to navigate conversations about career plans and college majors without ever mentioning the word art. It became our family's biggest unspoken truth, that I had once been a different person, someone who believed in the power of imagination and the importance of self-expression. College was supposed to be my fresh start, my chance to fully embrace the practical path my mother had carved out for me. I majored in business administration, joined the debate team, and maintained a respectable GPA. But something unexpected happened during my sophomore year that would change everything. I was walking across campus late one evening when I stumbled upon an art installation in the student center. It was a collaborative piece where students had contributed drawings, paintings, and sculptures representing their childhood dreams. As I stood there, surrounded by raw, imperfect, beautiful expressions of hope and imagination, something long dormant stirred inside me. One piece, in particular, caught my attention. It was a simple crayon drawing of a house with a crooked chimney and a purple sun, clearly created by someone who wasn't technically skilled but had poured their heart into it. The artist had written beside it, "This is the house where I felt safest as a child." I stared at that drawing for what felt like hours, tears streaming down my face as I remembered the joy I used to feel creating similar pieces. That night, I did something I hadn't done in over a decade. I bought a sketch pad and a set of colored pencils. My hands shook as I made the first marks on the paper, muscle memory slowly returning as I drew what came naturally. A small child sitting at a plastic table, surrounded by art supplies, smiling with pure joy. The drawing was objectively terrible. My proportions were off, my technique was rusty, and my hand-eye coordination had suffered from years of neglect. But as I looked at what I'd created, I felt something I hadn't experienced since childhood: pride in my own expression, regardless of its technical merit. I started drawing in secret, hiding my sketchpad like contraband. I'd sneak into empty classrooms to practice, draw during commercial breaks while watching TV, and fill pages with everything I'd wanted to create during those silent years. It was like rediscovering a language I'd forgotten I could speak. The more I drew, the more I remembered about who I used to be. I recalled the stories behind my childhood drawings, the emotions I'd tried to capture, the dreams I'd illustrated. I began to understand that my mother hadn't just thrown away paper and crayon marks. She'd discarded pieces of my identity, my voice, my way of processing the world. This revelation was both liberating and devastating. Liberating because I realized I could reclaim what had been taken from me. Devastating because I had to confront the years of self-doubt and suppressed creativity that had resulted from that single act of dismissal. I started researching art therapy programs, visiting local galleries, and reading about artists who had found their voices later in life. I discovered that many successful artists had faced similar challenges: family members who didn't understand their calling, setbacks that had temporarily derailed their dreams, periods of creative drought followed by explosive reawakening. But the most important discovery was that talent isn't just about technical skill. It's about having something to say and the courage to say it. My childhood drawings might not have been good enough by conventional standards, but they had been authentically mine. They had been my way of communicating with the world, my method of making sense of emotions and experiences that I couldn't yet verbalize. The phone call came on a rainy Thursday evening during my senior year. My mother's voice sounded different, smaller, more vulnerable than I'd ever heard it. "I need to tell you something," she said, her words heavy with years of unspoken weight. "I'm cleaning out the attic, and I found something that belongs to you." My heart stopped. "What do you mean?" I didn't throw away all of your drawings. I kept some. I've been carrying this secret for 15 years, and I can't do it anymore." The next weekend, I drove home with my hands gripping the steering wheel, my mind racing with questions and possibilities. When I arrived, my mother led me to the attic, where a small box sat dusty and forgotten in the corner. With trembling hands, she opened it to reveal a collection of my childhood artwork, carefully preserved between sheets of tissue paper. As I lifted each drawing, memories flooded back with startling clarity. Here was the birthday card I'd made for my grandmother, the comic strip about the kindness superhero, the family portrait where everyone had purple hair because I decided purple was the color of love. They were all there, saved from the garbage bin by hands that had claimed they weren't worth keeping. "Why?" I whispered, unable to look at her. My mother sat heavily on an old trunk, her shoulders sagging with the weight of carried guilt. "Because I was terrified," she said simply. "I was so afraid that if I encouraged you, you'd end up like me." Like you. For the first time in my life, my mother told me about her own dreams. About the poetry she'd written in college, the novel she'd started but never finished, the creative writing degree she'd abandoned for something more practical. She told me about the rejection letters that had crushed her spirit, the well-meaning relatives who had convinced her that art was a luxury she couldn't afford. "When I saw how much you loved creating, how naturally it came to you, I panicked," she continued, tears streaming down her face. "I thought if I could steer you away from art early enough, you'd never have to face the disappointment I did. I thought I was protecting you from heartbreak." I held my childhood drawings against my chest, feeling the weight of all those lost years. "But Mom, you didn't protect me from heartbreak. You caused it." She nodded, her face crumpling with the realization of what her fear had cost us both. "I know. I threw away your drawings because I was really throwing away my own dreams. I was so angry at myself for giving up that I couldn't bear to watch you pursue what I'd lost." We sat in that dusty attic for hours, surrounded by the evidence of my hidden childhood and her secret shame. I learned that she had checked on my artwork in the garbage bin later that night, rescuing what she could before the trash collectors came. She had kept them not because she thought they were good, but because she couldn't bear to let them go completely. "I was wrong," she said finally. "They were beautiful because they were yours. They were good enough because they made you happy. And I robbed you of that happiness because I was too afraid to face my own failures." The revelation changed everything between us. I realized that my mother's rejection hadn't been about my art at all. It had been about her own unhealed wounds, her own relationship with creativity and risk. She had been a drowning woman trying to save me by keeping me away from the water, not realizing that I was born to swim. As I prepared to leave that day, carrying my rescue drawings and 15 years of new understanding, my mother made one final confession. "I've been taking art classes," she said quietly, "at the community center. I'm terrible at it, but for the first time in decades, I remember what it feels like to create something just because it brings me joy." Looking at my mother, this woman who had shaped my life with her fears and her love, her mistakes and her courage to finally face them, I realized that it's never too late to reclaim what we've lost. We can't change the past, but we can choose how to move forward. Today, I run an art therapy program for children and adults who have lost their creative voices. On my office wall hangs a simple crayon drawing of a house with a crooked chimney and a purple sun. Not because it's technically perfect, but because it represents the moment I remembered that good enough was never the point. The point was always the courage to create, the bravery to express what lives inside us, and the understanding that our dreams are worth saving, even when others can't see their value. My mother visits my studio sometimes, bringing her own imperfect but heartfelt creations. We are both learning together that it's never too late to pick up the crayons we once put down.